Pierre Poilievre is the only one who can bring change to Canada. Now, here to tell you more about the only man who can beat Mark Carney, I have the pleasure of introducing to you Anna Poilievre. So Anna is an entrepreneur, dedicated advocate against human trafficking, and a staunch supporter of women's empowerment. Born in Venezuela, raised in Montreal, Anna moved to Ottawa in 2006, where she met her future husband, Pierre Poilievre, in 2012. They were married in 2017. She's an active member of our conservative movement and the driving force behind conservative merch and Pierre's #1 supporter. In 2024, she launched Their Stories Matter, an online platform dedicated to giving voice to survivors of human trafficking. Anna is committed to supporting women and elevating them through her online magazine, Pretty and Smart Co., and the Lead Her Forward initiative, which seeks to pay it forward by inspiring and connecting and celebrating women. But Anna would tell you that her greatest and most important role is being the true supporter of her husband, Pierre Poilievre, and raising her children, Valentina and Cruz. So, without further ado, ladies and gentlemen, please join me in welcome Anna Poilievre.
Daddy on Saturday nights, he taught her how to tie skates. Her brothers taught her how to fight. She can wear high heels and flannel. She can look sexy in a tube. She likes snowstorms and golden light, but if you're lucky, she'll love you. Canadian girl, Canadian girl.
Hello! Hello, Vaughan. So Canada, here we are at a crucial time where we must decide whether we are going to elect for a 4th term a Liberal government with the same team who has left us with a weakened economy, rising crime, unaffordable food and housing, or are we going to elect a conservative government who's going to put Canada first for a change? Now, in order to bring that change, you have to make sure that you go out and vote. So tell me, who has already voted here? Ladies and gentlemen, thank you. This journey began for my husband and my family about 3 years and 2 months ago, when my husband decided to run for the leader of the Conservative Party of Canada. Ever since, he has been traveling from coast to coast to coast so that he can step away from the Ottawa bubble and to hear people directly. Because what we need is a government and a leader of the people, by the people. Leadership is not born in the boardroom of the elites. Leadership is not born from fancy titles or degrees. Leadership comes from true patriotism, true love for our country, our true north, strong and free. Now it's true, my husband has been doing this for most of his adult life. He has been right here at home fighting for all of us, our youth, our families, our seniors, and that is something to be proud of. So when Mr. Carney says that my husband doesn't know how the world works, I'll tell you what. My husband knows how Canada works and how to make it work for all of us. And while I love all of my husband's policies and truly believe that it's going to help all of us, it is important to understand the why. It's important to understand the men behind those policies. My husband, he was born from a teenage mother who gave him out for adoption to two school teachers from Saskatchewan. They worked really hard and they lived paycheck to paycheck. Pierre worked for everything in his life and nothing was handed to him. I, I was born in Caracas, Venezuela. Muchos latinos aquí presentes esta noche. Es un orgullo de poder representar y ser una voz fuerte para la gente latina. I was born in Caracas, Venezuela, and my family immigrated here in 1995 when I was 8 years old. My father is here tonight. When my family arrived, my dad had to trade his business suits to go and work and pick up fruits and vegetables because that's all he could do to feed our family. He taught me that there's no greater dignity than to provide for your own family, and all work is dignifying. Thank you, Dad. So, by the time that I was 17, I had moved out of home and become financially independent, 100%. By the time that I was 19, I left Montreal, moved to Ottawa, took a student loan, put myself to university, and had a full-time job at the same time so that I could pay for rent and food all by myself. By the time that I was 25, a few months before I met my husband, I was working in the Senate, and I had saved enough money to put a down payment on a little townhouse in the east end of Ottawa, all under my dad's advice. Thank you. So that little townhouse, it was $230,000 in 2012, 3 years before the Liberal government took office. That was the Canadian promise. And that is what my husband is fighting for, to restore the Canadian promise so that we can afford homes, we can afford a future on safe streets. So ladies and gentlemen, this is who we are, the Poilievres. We are one of you, you are one of us. We're all fighting in this to restore the Canadian promise, and we need all of you fighting along our side. And that is why it is my pleasure to share with you my husband, the next Prime Minister of Canada, Pierre Poilievre.
There's something tender about, there's something hidden about, there's something all generations can have and can hold. We break down the walls and break out of the mold. Yeah, we fight for what's right. We're wild and we're free from the mountains of you leave them in this, then come back and chase it. We'll travel the distance, we're so proud of it. We fight for what's right, we're wild and we're free from the mountains of gold. And all you can see is more than just a choice. We're freedom flows. It's all
Thank you, Vaughan. Who Thank you, Vaughan. Who's voting for a change in Canada? Who's voting to axe the taxes? Who's voting for homes you can actually afford? Who's voting to stop the crime for a change? And who's voting to bring home the Canadian promise? Thank you very much, Vaughan. Great to be here today in the LiUNA. Thank you very headquarters of LiUNA. Are there any laborers here, hardworking people? You know, when I think of LiUNA, I learned of this union. I used to go over to my buddy's parents' place for dinner on a Sunday night. They're old, classic Italian family. Yeah. There aren't any Italians in Vaughan, are there? One or two. And anyway, the grandfather would sit at the head of the table. His name was Albino, and he couldn't speak any English. He and his wife had come from Italy in 1973, from Calabria. Calabrese? Okay, that's half the room is Calabrese, I think. And he had this plaque on the wall. It said LiUNA. And the only time I ever heard him utter an English word is I pointed up at that and I said, "What is it?" And I didn't know at the time. This is about 20 years ago. And he said, "Pension." That was his pension. He got off the boat, 73, got a job, paving roads, and he earned himself a pension. But the house that they lived in was about 7 or 8 minutes from Parliament Hill in downtown Ottawa, a G7 capital. And they actually paid off their entire mortgage in 7 years. Can you imagine that? That was Canada. That was Canada back in the 70s and 80s and even 90s and even the 2000s. As Anna just told you the story about how she was able to afford a home independently, having a decent job, out of school, from a modest background. Now that family that I told you about, he's now, as Albino, God rest his soul, has moved on. And his granddaughters will graduate from university. They speak perfect English. They would not be able to make a down payment on that house, even if they worked nonstop for 15 years. In Toronto and the greater GTA today, it takes 29 years to save up for a down payment on a house for the average family. Everything costs more. Food prices have risen 37% faster under this Liberal government in Canada than they did in the United States in the same time period. After catch and release Liberal laws, crime, chaos, drugs, and disorder are overtaking our once safe streets. My friends, after a lost Liberal decade of rising costs and crime, we cannot afford a fourth Liberal term. We need a change with a new Conservative government. And it turns out we have a plan for that change. It's called the Change Platform for an Affordable Life, for safe streets, for Canada First. This is the plan to bring change to Canadians. Now, it is a clear plan, a plan that will cut income tax by 15% so that your hard work pays off for a change. It's a plan to cut the Liberal deficit by 70% with less bureaucracy, less consultants, less foreign aid, less money wasted so that inflation comes down and your dollar retains power for a change. It is a plan to axe the sales tax on new homes and incentivize municipalities to cut their tax to bring down the cost of buying a house by $100,000, again, for a change. It's a plan to lock up criminals so that you're safe on your streets again for a change. Après les décennies perdues des libéraux, des coûts qui augmentent, on ne peut pas s'offrir un quatrième mandat. Il faut que ça change. Avec un nouveau gouvernement conservateur qui a un plan pour faire changement, un plan qui vise à rendre la vie abordable, un plan pour réduire le déficit libéral de 70% en éliminant la bureaucratie, les consultants, l'aide à l'étranger et d'autres gaspillages pour enfin baisser l'inflation. Un plan pour couper les impôts de 15%, pour abolir le TPS sur les maisons neuves, pour que vous puissiez acheter une maison, et un plan pour mettre les criminels derrière des barreaux pour que les communautés canadiennes soient sécuritaires pour faire changement. C'est ça le plan pour faire changement. Now compare this. Oh, wait a second. Who's this? Who do we have here? What do we have here? Oh my goodness, what a bright young lady we have. What is your name? Trinity. You want to come up on the stage? All right, come on up on the stage. There you go. Come on over here, Trinity. Wow. Can you come over here? Show everybody in the crowd what your sign says. You know what it says? Can you read that to everybody?
Axe the tax, fix the budget, stop the crime, bring it home.
What was that? Is this your little girl here?
Future. We're here for their future.
That's why we're all here, isn't it? Is this your little girl? Amazing. Well, she's going to be here giving speeches on stages like this one day. I think we have a future prime minister here, don't we? Way to go, Trinity. You've made us all very proud. Yeah, thank you so much. What a brilliant young lady. What a future we have with young people like Trinity. Amazing. What an amazing group we have here of brilliant young people, the next generation who are ready to already take direction, take the leadership position. So we better get, I love you too. God love you. Thank you. Now, well, we need you too, and that's why I need to ask a question. Has everybody voted yet? Excellent. It's a lot at stake. I told you a little bit about our plan for change. Did you hear about the platform that Justin Trudeau released on Saturday? Yeah. No, that wasn't a slip up. That wasn't a slip up. Oh no, that was not a slip up. We found out that Mark Carney's platform was actually written by the Liberal Party for Justin Trudeau before he decided to resign suddenly. And it was just carried over. And then when Mr. Carney became leader, they handed him the platform. They said, okay, this looks good. Control F, replace Trudeau with Carney. And away we go, right? Now, it's not entirely fair. I don't want to be entirely fair. Unfair to the Liberals here. In fact, it's not that Carney's election platform is as bad as Trudeau's, in fairness. It's worse. Carney is proposing in this platform to add $130 billion of additional spending above and beyond the roughly $110 billion in debt that Trudeau had already budgeted for. So when you add the Trudeau and Carney plans together, because they stack one on top of the other, a fourth Liberal term would mean $250 billion of extra inflationary debt, which would drive up food prices, home prices, and the cost of living. It would threaten our economy, and weaken our people, and make us even more vulnerable to the Americans at this time. My friends, after a lost Liberal decade, we cannot afford a fourth Liberal term. We need a change. And if you have any doubt, about how bad things are about to get under the Liberals, you don't have to take my word for it. You only have to ask the department in the government that reports directly to Mark Carney. It's called the Privy Council Department. It's literally the department responsible to the Prime Minister. And quietly, they published a report about what life is going to look like in Canada in 15 years, in the year 2040. And this is what it says, and I'm quoting here. In 2040, upward social mobility is almost unheard of in Canada. Hardly anyone believes that they can build a better life for themselves or their children through their own efforts. And many worry about sliding down the social order. It forecasts more people may struggle to afford rent, bills, or groceries. The resulting stress could worsen mental health challenges. This would increase demand for social services. Then it goes on to talk about housing. In 2040, owning a home is not a realistic goal for many. Inequality between those who rent and those who own has become a key social, economic, and political driver of conflict. Education. It says in 2040, pursuing post-secondary education is no longer considered a reliable path to social mobility. Fewer people choose post-secondary because they see it less as a path to a successful career than a way to reinforce their membership in a so-called elite. That's their words. They say people lose faith in the Canadian project. They say that some of our people will be leaving because it's too difficult to stay in Canada. Again, this is Mark Carney's own government department projecting 15 years hence. It says that many may emigrate to jurisdictions where they perceive upward social mobility and higher standards of living are easier to obtain. If workers leave Canada, it may mean it's harder for us to pay for our older population. And finally, the most terrifying warning of all, and again, this comes out of a government report. It's not some sort of an interest group or a shock journalist. It says that food prices may get so expensive, and I'm quoting here, people may start to hunt, fish, and forage on public lands and waterways. This is what the Liberal government says Canada is going to look like in 15 years. So, is this the Canada you grew up with? Do you think that Canadians should just sit back and take this depressing future? Or do you think it's time to have some hope for a change and take back a bright future for our kids and our country? I agree with you. It doesn't have to be this way. We have a plan for change. We can turn this thing around. We know the basic values of Canada, hard work, entrepreneurship, living within our means, supporting the less fortunate, protecting our borders, holding criminals accountable. These basic values that built our country over so many generations, the values that guided our parents and grandparents as they built this country, those values are what created the Canadian promise in the first place, that gave everybody the chance to arrive where we are today, that allowed me to stand on this stage starting from humble beginnings. And we're going to use those same Canadian values to rebuild our future. And we believe, everyone in this room believes, in a brighter future for all of us. We know that change is never easy, but making the right decisions can make it worthwhile. And that's why we presented this platform today, because we have hope for this country, and we're ready to bring that hope right across Canada. Absolutely. We're going to bring it home. But in order to have a bright future, we need to have sound, solid money. Inflation has raged out of control ever since Mr. Carney became Trudeau's economic advisor, precisely because the government is spending too much. Today, I laid out a detailed plan about how we're going to fix our budget to stop the inflation that is eroding your purchasing power for food and housing. What we're going to do to start with is cut the waste. I announced that we're going to streamline the bureaucracy through attrition. Every time 3 people retire, we're only going to hire 2 back. Over time, we'll reduce the size of the bureaucracy, which reduces the tax bill for the people paying for it. Then there are the consultants. We're spending $20 billion a year on consultants. That works out to $1,400 in taxes for every Canadian family just to fund consultants. But don't worry, the Liberals know there's a problem with it. They said we're going to spend less money on consultants, but to come up with a plan to do that, they hired some consultants. We've got a better idea. Our Conservative plan for change will cut the budget for consulting by $10 billion annually. We'll bring our money home to Canada. The Liberals increasingly send our money abroad. They gave money to the Asian Infrastructure Bank to fund pipelines and roadways in China and across Asia that we can't even get built here in Canada. They gave money to the UN agency that helped Hamas carry out the attacks of October 2nd. We will save money for Canadians, $3 billion annually by cutting back foreign aid to dictators, terrorists, and global bureaucracy. For a change. Bring it home. We're going to bring in a law that requires politicians. Yes, we're going to bring the money home. Bring your money. The money that's gone abroad is going to be coming back home to this country. And we're also going to pass a common sense law, dollar for dollar. Every time the government brings in a new dollar of spending by law, it will be required to find a dollar of savings. This will force politicians and bureaucrats to make the same trade-offs that you make every single day. This or that, or get a bargain on this and that. Come in under the budget. You can't just print the money, tax the money, or borrow the money. You've been pinching your pennies long enough. It's time for government to start pinching its pennies too. And you know, there is a better way to generate additional revenue for our cherished social programs than raising taxes. And it's by growing the economy for a change, right? We need to grow it. We need to grow it. We've got our great trade union leaders here today. When they need, you know, they grow themselves. They go out and they add new members by helping create more jobs, right? That's how you guys make everybody better off. Now, we need to do the same thing in Canada. Our economy has been shrinking in per capita terms, have the worst economic growth of any G7 country since Carney became Trudeau's economic advisor. But we can unlock more growth. Instead of creating more cash, we're going to create more of what cash buys, grow more food, build more homes, and produce more of our great Canadian resources. That's how we generate the wealth that will fund a prosperous future for us all. It starts by removing the anti-development laws. We will repeal the anti-pipeline law C-69 for a change. We will end the tanker ban. We will get rid of the energy cap. We'll bring in shovel-ready zones, areas that are pre-permitted for construction, so that any business that wants to build something can go online, see a pre-published, legally binding permit that says where they can build it and what they have to do to comply. So there's no 17-year-long wait to get a shovel in the ground on a mine. You get busy, you get building, and you start hiring these workers and giving them powerful paychecks to do it. We need to approve LNG liquefaction plants. We have 1,300 trillion cubic feet of natural gas that we could be selling to the Asians so that they can break their dependence on coal, sell it to the Europeans so that they break their dependence on Putin, and we turn dollars for dictators into paychecks for our people in Canada for a change. we're gonna go from having the second slowest building permits in the OECD to the fastest building permits. We'll cut 25% of red tape in the government, 25% fewer rules and regulations, and we're going to assign the Auditor General to keep count to make sure the red tape doesn't keep creeping back. Well, we also have to cut taxes on growth. Our plan will cut taxes on energy. For example, we know the Liberals still have the carbon tax in law. If Mark Carney really wanted to get rid of the tax, he would have passed a law to do it. Instead, just 28 days before the election, they hid it from the gas pump to make you forget so that they could trick you into voting them back in for a fourth term, after which they would surely bring the tax back higher than ever. They have a tax, the tax on Canadian steel, which will drive not just steel, but all Canadian industry that Mark Carney says he wants to raise. That will drive our jobs and our money south of the border. It's funny, another thing that Carney and Trump share in common. Both of them want to tax Canadian industry. Trump with tariffs, Carney with carbon taxes. I want neither. I will axe the entire tax for everyone, for real, for a change. And then we need to bring back the investment. Investment is drying up and fleeing out of our country. In fact, you know, in Canada today, the average worker, if you take all the business investment, you divide it by the total number of workers in Canada, it works out to $15,000 a year. In the US, it's $28,000. So the American worker is getting twice as much tools, technology, machines, and factories. The stuff, the physical assets that produce things. That's why the American worker is making more money, even though the Canadian worker is by every measure a superior worker, a better worker, a smarter worker. He's not making as much money because our businesses are starved of investment. Why would that be? Well, when you raise taxes on investment, you punish people and entrepreneurs. What do? Well, capital goes where capital grows, and it doesn't grow here anymore. That's why we're going to change it. We're going to bring real change. We will pass the Canada First Reinvestment Tax Cut. Zero capital gains tax when you reinvest the money back in Canada. Bring it home. Bring it home. We're going to bring it home for a change. But you know what you need to bring it home? You need to vote, that's for sure, a good reminder. But you need to have a home, right? And right now we have, thank you very much. Prime Minister, minister means servant. Prime Minister means first servant. It would be my honor to serve every single one of you in this room. That's actually the big philosophical difference here. The big philosophical difference between myself and Mr. Carney. He thinks he's the boss. He thinks he's here to run your life. He thinks he knows better than the rest of you. He knows he thinks he knows how to spend your money better than you do. He thinks he knows what kind of car you should drive. He wants to ban you from driving a gas-powered vehicle. They want to, his housing plan is to have everybody live in a government-owned, prefabricated, manufactured, tiny house with no driveway, by the way. He believes that he should control your money, your direction, and everything. I believe precisely the opposite. I'm not running for office to take power. I'm running for office to give it back to all of you for a change. But you need to have a home. And I believe in the dream of home ownership, something you won't even find in the Liberal platform. They never talk about home ownership. You want to own a house back there? Anybody want to own a house for a change? They want to own a house. We used to take that for granted in Canada. Yeah, we got some young people back there. Like to start a family, maybe? You know, that was the Canadian dream, the Canadian promise that you could enjoy home ownership. But housing costs have actually risen faster in Canada than any other G7 country. In fact, they've outpaced incomes more in Canada than in all but one OECD country during the lost Liberal decade. Mr. Carney proposes exactly the same policies as Justin Trudeau. More government programs, government bureaucracy that cost tens of billions of dollars, but don't actually get anything built. He even brought back Justin Trudeau's failed housing minister. How can you imagine, after they doubled housing costs, Carney's plan now is to repeat the same policies with the same Liberal ministers, the same Liberal platform. We need a change. Our approach is to tackle the real problem. Now, why are houses so expensive in Canada? The answer is taxes and bureaucracy. In Ontario today, 30% of the cost of a new home is just direct taxes. And that, what's that? Yeah, that's true. That's also very expensive. We'll come to that in a moment. Everything is expensive in Canada, but we're going to stick on houses for a second. In addition to the direct taxes on houses, there's the indirect bureaucracy. We have the second slowest building permits in the OECD. More money for a new home goes to bureaucrats in offices than goes to the carpenters, electricians, and plumbers who actually build the homes. Only conservatives will change it. Our plan is to cut the bureaucracy and the red tape, axe the taxes, and build the homes. And we will lead the way by axing the federal sales tax on new homes to save you $65,000. For a change. Now, then this is an area where I will give credit to the city of Vaughan. The municipality here has actually cut construction taxes by 50%. We need to see more of that. I'm very hard on the mayors when they raise taxes in block homes, but we got to give credit where it's due. They cut it here, and I give them credit. But not only that, I will incentivize municipalities here and everywhere to do the same. I will agree to pay half the cost to cut the development taxes across the country with a goal of bringing down the taxes by $100,000 a home. We will incentivize municipalities, requiring them to speed up permits to build 15% more homes per year. We'll sell off 6,000 federal buildings and thousands of acres of federal land to build another 300,000 homes on what is now largely dormant and underused federal land spaces. As I said, we'll cut taxes on reinvesting in home building, but you also need the builders, the people who swing the hammers and frame the homes and lay down the foundation, the people who make up the great building trades unions we have here. And so we're going to back up the trades. Our plan will fund 350,000 union training spots right across this country to train up the carpenters, the welders, the electricians, and countless other people who will literally build the country. Boots, not suits. And, you know, not only that, we're going to bring in tax fairness. We'll allow our trades workers to write off the full cost of their food, transportation, and accommodation to go from one job site to another. We'll bring back the $4,000 apprenticeship grant. And I will be sending a are you a father of a future tradesman, or you're a tradesman? Excellent. You agree with what I have to say on that? What's your trade? High-rise construction. Wow. Don't look down, eh? Impressive. Takes a lot of courage. There's a job where you can't get something wrong, eh? Thank you for building the country. You know, I'm going to be sending, I wonder what you think of this idea. I'm going to send a gift to every high school principal in the country. I know, education is provincial. There's nothing in the Constitution that says you can't send a present from the Prime Minister's office to the principal's office, right? It's going to be a big box about the size of this stage, and in it, there's going to be a module for every single licensed trade so that they can begin doing pre-apprenticeships with our young people as early as age 14. It's about boots, not suits. Boots, not suits. But we want these brilliant tradespeople to bring, what's that? Yes, tool making and everything else, shop class. I can't control that, part's out of my reach, that's provincial. All the constitutional scholars are going to be yelling at me, but I can send the gift, and we will back the trades, and we will make sure that any young person in this country that wants to get into the trades will be encouraged to do so, and we will tell them that the best jobs in the future are going to be in the trades. Boots, not suits. But we also want them to bring those paychecks home to safe neighborhoods so that we're going to stop the crime for a change. Everywhere I go, jail not bail, everywhere I go, I meet people who are increasingly violated by repeat offenders, released again and again and again. It doesn't seem like they can be locked up for any reason whatsoever. It doesn't matter how much crime they do. The laws will not let them keep them behind bars. There will be jail, not bail. To start with, that's C-75, the Liberal Catch and Release Law, which it requires the judge, and I'm quoting from the law right now. It says the judge must release the accused at, quote, the earliest opportunity under, quote, the least onerous conditions. In other words, they have to go right back out on the street, oftentimes before paperwork is even filled out on their most recent arrest. In Vancouver, they had to arrest the same 40 offenders 6,000 times. Again and again, they go out. If they had kept those 40 offenders in prison, there'd be 6,000 people attacked, violated, hit over the head with a baseball bat. Then there's C5, the Liberal law that allows repeat offenders to do their sentences in the comfort of their living rooms, watching Netflix or playing Grand Theft Auto, preparing to do it all over again. My friends, we will repeal the Liberal catch and release law. No more house arrest. We will pass a 3 strikes you're out law. Very simple. 3 serious offenses. You have no chance for bail, parole, probation, or house arrest. You're going in for 10 years and you won't get out till you behave well, pass drug tests, and learn an employable skill. We're going to stop the crime for a change. And we're going to also tackle the drugs. The drug crisis has been raging out of control in Canada. We have lost 50,000 people to drug overdoses. We are going to save our youth together. We're going to protect them against this terrible poison, a poison that is 100 times more powerful than heroin. It is only 2 milligrams that it takes to stop someone's lungs from operating. And what we have, there you go. What was that, young lady? I know. This is the life that we have today, but I'm here to tell you to have hope, because we're going to turn this thing around. We're going to turn this thing around. We hear these stories every day. The fentanyl in the lower mainland of BC, the parents actually have to walk up and down the soccer pitch in a line to make sure there are no needles or crack pipes before the kids go and play soccer. They can't walk their dogs in a park anymore because the dog will breathe in some of the drug residues that's been left behind. These are almost unimaginable. But we know how to we know why the problem exists. The government has liberalized drugs. They're giving out tax-funded opioids. They've reduced penalties for fentanyl dealers. They've allowed 99% of shipping containers to enter our country without any inspection whatsoever, and they want to continue doing it. Mark Carney will carry on exactly the same soft on crime, easy on drugs policy as Justin Trudeau if he's reelected. But it doesn't have to be this way. Our plan is to treat the mass fentanyl producers and traffickers like the murderers that they are. They will get life sentences. They will never get out of jail. But we're not finished yet. We have even more hope. We're going to secure the borders, providing scanners. 2,000 more frontline CBSA officers, watchtowers that will interrupt the guns, drugs, and stolen cars. And we know that the way that we turn this around is by giving people who are addicted to drugs a chance to cleanse their bodies and restart their lives. Treatment and recovery works. I have seen countless examples of people who've been down and out on the street, on the edge of death, get into treatment, suffer through the difficult period of withdrawal, enjoy counseling, group therapy, physical exercise, yoga, job preparation, housing, back on their feet to take responsibility for their lives. We will fund 50,000 treatment facilities so that we can bring our loved ones home. And my message when I was in Moncton at the Harvest House Treatment Center to the young men who were there, they said to me, "Thank you for your help." And I said, no, I'm not the one offering the help. I'm here asking for help. I'm here to ask you for a favor. I need you. I need you to get better, because you're going to go back out onto the street corner. You're going to grab the next guy. You're going to bring him in here. He's going to get better. And then he's going to go back out and save another person. And we're going to defeat this crisis and bring our loved ones home drug-free. That's the hopeful message we have. We will stop the guns by locking up gun smugglers for life. We will do the same for large-scale human traffickers. And by the way, we will pay for the additional border security that we intend to fund by canceling the wasteful, multi-billion-dollar liberal gun grab that targets law-abiding hunters and sport shooters. Make no mistake, if you are a hunter, liberal, we got some hunters here. There we go. There you go. There you go. You know, their report says that you're going to have to hunt for food because groceries are getting so expensive, but then they want to take your hunting rifle away. You can't win with these guys. There's no doubt about it, though. Make the message go far and wide. If the Liberals are reelected, they will ban your hunting rifle. They have said that that is their plan. My friends, this is ridiculous. Spending police resources and billions of dollars going after Grandpa Joe's hunting rifle will solve nothing. I want to protect Canadians from criminals. The Liberals want to protect turkeys from hunters. You decide who's got it right. But to protect our country, we need a strong military, and we will rebuild the Canadian Armed Forces. Absolutely. That's right. We will bring our money home from useless funding of useless foreign bureaucracies. We'll cut back office administration and procurement boondoggles and put the money into frontline equipment for our brave men and women in uniform. We will buy 4 massive Arctic icebreakers, Poseidon surveillance aircraft. We will add new landing strips in the north. We will fill the recruitment for all the vacant spaces in the Army, Air Force, and Navy. We will build the first Arctic base since the Cold War, CFB, Iqaluit. And as always, our military will be guided by a warrior culture, not a woke culture. We will repair the broken liberal immigration system. The Liberals have ruined immigration by allowing mass fraud and fakery in the international student and temporary foreign worker program. They've also allowed for fraud in the refugee program. They've allowed population, not allowed, they've provoked a population growth that is 3 times the rate as our growth in the housing stock, leading to shortages in not only housing, but healthcare and in jobs. This all because they believed in this crazy idea they call the Century Initiative, to bring our population up to 100 million people. This is crazy. We cannot afford, the truth is, my friends, we cannot afford a 4th Liberal term of out of control spending, taxes, and other schemes that have priced Canadians out of the market. We will fix not only the budget, but we will fix the immigration system by ending the fraud, bringing people in only in numbers that we can house, employ, and care for. And when newcomers arrive, they will find this a welcoming land filled with opportunity. We have 20,000 immigrant doctors, 32,000 immigrant nurses who cannot work because they do not have licenses. We will do in the professions what we've been doing in the trades for the last 73 years. We'll bring in a national license for the provinces to opt into, so called the Blue Seal, so that our immigrant doctors and nurses can take a test, prove they're qualified, get to work serving patients and earning powerful paychecks in our community. We're going to unite our people again. We're going to reunite the people and trust the people. Allow people to make decisions for their own lives, move forward with growing confidence, safe in their communities, ready to build a brighter future, optimistic, eyes looking upward. This will once again be a nation where people are united around a promise. That really is what Canada is all about. You know, you can't define this country by ethnicity or a particular religion or background. We define ourselves by the shared promise that brought all of us here, whether it's been for 6 months or 6 generations or 6,000 years as an Indigenous Canadian. All of us are here for a promise, a very simple promise. It's better, actually way better than the American dream. They have a dream, but you wake up from a dream. A promise is like a contract. It's a deal. You do this, you get that. And the deal was this: you work hard, you can do anything you want. If you're a smart kid who likes science and you're 7 years old living in a poor community, you can look up and say, maybe I'm the guy that's going to solve, I'm the guy who's going to cure cancer. Or maybe your dream is to just open up an auto shop where you have 10 employees, you fix things and you master the science and the art of mechanics. Or maybe your dream is to have a nice house with 4 rooms and 2.5 kids, 1 dog and half a cat. Whatever you want to do in this country, if you work for it, you can achieve it. That's what my parents taught me. That's what I believe in. That's what this country gave me. That's what I want for everybody else. The Canadian promise unites us around that common goal. You know, we are not a nation of tax collectors and toll masters, of bureaucrats and busybodies, of gatekeepers and grandees, of rulers and rule makers. No, we are a nation of explorers and entrepreneurs, of artists and adventurers, of workers and warriors, of pioneers and patriots. Together, we will bring home the country that we knew and love, a country that protects its vulnerable, secures its borders, rewards its workers, unleashes its entrepreneurs, honors its history, upholds its traditions, rebuilds its military, and flies its flag. Together, we will rebuild the promise of Canada so that anyone who works hard gets a beautiful house in a safe neighborhood under our proud flag. Canada first, Canada always. Let's bring it home.